Hey everybody, this is Rudy Sarzo, and you're listening to Talking Blues.
So, Rudy, I understand that you're into computer animation. Are you still doing that?
No, I'm still not in it as much as I used to be as far as creating content, even though I'm involved with projects that are animated, but it's more from a musical or maybe voice contribution rather than starting with a pixel and creating an animated project. Yeah.
How did you get into that initially?
Ah, okay, that's a great question. Well, once musicians became independent, the democratizing of creativity through computer technology, that's been a wonderful thing. I mean, people equate, musicians or the record industry equates the the downfall of the recording industry as far as marketing and distribution, making money, monetizing it,
Right.
due to the technology of Napster, let's say. Napster that brought in all of these, illegal downloads in many forms. I mean, it's always digital, but it could be software, it could be music, it could be movies, whatever. Whatever you can digitize, it's always in danger of being pirated. But then again, it's the same technology that gave us the ability for all musicians to create and distribute your creations
Hmm.
through the internet, social media, create awareness of what you're doing, who you are, your artistry, everything. So that's what I look at. I don't focus on the negative of technology. I focus on the positive of technology. So at the very dawn of the technology that I went out and bought a Session 8 Pro Tools system with a Mac and 1 gigabyte hard drive. Ooh, I was rocking. That was 1995, 96. 1 gigabyte. Holy mackerel. Because before that everything was floppy. I remember going on the road with my an Amiga computer with floppy disks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
a huge case. I mean, it had less memory than this tuner that I put on my headstock, and of my bass. And but anyways, so very early on in the game, I got into creating content with computer software, and one of the Pro Tools being the leading, especially because what happens is in Hollywood, certain software, certain companies become the de facto, and Avid as a digital uh, editing for motion,
Yeah.
whether it's television or movies, and now streaming on through the internet, became like the de facto editing software, Avid. So
Yeah.
where you have video, you have audio, or
Yes.
like it's audio is half of the picture. Like if you go to a movie, the soundtrack is considered half of the experience, hearing that music or these special effects, the sound effects, things blowing up and stuff like that, and the music that puts you in a certain mood, helps the story move along. So so Avid uh, actually bought Pro Tools or developed it. It became like one. If you're
Right.
in the movie industry, you're using Pro Tools for your sound. So in Hollywood, LA, most of the studios, that's what they had, Pro Tools. Even though there was another one called Logic, which I purchased when I bought my Pro Tools system for recording my Session 8, I also bought Logic. Now, Logic at that time was the one that was available with MIDI. Pro Tools did not have MIDI for many years, and then they incorporated MIDI into it. because
Right.
a lot of the music that was being done on Pro Tools was not from from independent composers, was mostly soundtrack. You would go, the conductor would go into a facility, a studio, and record that with Pro Tools. So you needed SMPTE coding more than you actually needed MIDI.
Right.
And then later on, they decided, okay, well, we're gonna catch up with everybody else and incorporate MIDI. They were like the last major software company to incorporate MIDI into it, right? Okay, so you got Avid, you got Pro Tools, and then special effects. So Avid purchased a software called Softimage that was developed in Canada, French Canada, Montreal, and magnificent. It was one of the most intuitive of all of the software packages. At one point it included lip syncing and all these massive. There's a software called Massive, which is it's kind of like a standalone software where you can create scenes, people fighting. That's what they use in Lord of the Rings and all those movies when they have like these major, like thousands of people fighting each other with AI, artificial intelligence. So you program the soldiers to actually once two or three gang up on one dies, the other one moves along to fight another battle. So you have all these things going on, right? So it's artificial intelligence. But anyways, that's how sophisticated the program was. So it got purchased by Avid. So now they have three major packages under their umbrella. You got the video editing, you got the audio recording, and now you got visual effects with Softimage. So me being a user of Pro Tools, I have friends in the company, and once I started getting into computer, CG technology, they say, "Hey, would you like to start using Softimage?" Because I saw the trend coming back in 1995. About musicians independently being able to create music, and it's always been a plus. Creativity, no matter what tool you use, it's all about creativity, and this allowed all of us to create and share our creativity because now I do projects from people all over the world. They send me the tracks, I record them, and I send them back, and it's a band from Scandinavia or a band from South America or a band from England, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's global. It's a global contributions that were not possible 3 decades ago because of you can't be flying all over the place just to record one song. But now,
Right.
yes, you can. So yes, the pros of the technology are just mind-boggling. How positive it is. The as far as creativity, yes, it's immense. And so I was trained with CG with Softimage, and that's how I got into it. And mainly because I this is my pre LASIX, so I was losing. I needed to wear glasses as I got older, and it was not being. I lost the joy of playing because I had to put my glasses on to practice, and then when I perform, I took them off because even if I play above the 12th fret, it's under the frame, so I really could not see very well when I'm moving around the stage. It was awful. So I decided to get LASIK just as a career to move to so I could still be performing. Then once I got the LASIK, I got my vision back. I could see better than I've ever seen, and I got my passion for playing again. So I said, you know what, I'm going to continue going the path of what I am. I'm a musician, you know. I mean, but what it has given me, my training in CG, is that now I can collaborate, contribute with animated projects, and understand the process. I understand it. I might not be involved in the creation of the animation, but I'm, I'm in the family. I understand what's going on.
I presume that you must have had some sort of an artistic background. I mean, drawing or visualizing things.
artistic background. That's yeah, no, no, that's interesting. That's interesting because that just sparks what you just mentioned. What is art? What is art? Yes, no, it's I understand. I art is a tool of communication, and my native language is Spanish, and when my family moved to the United States, my biggest challenge was language barrier, and I understood how to communicate, enhancing my communication skills with a very limited vocabulary and expanded with my education in the United States. But also, I needed immediately to communicate certain emotions with a very minimal vocabulary. So I learned how to enhance it by using body language and other expressions. So art form, even, and I found that the more, trying to find the right word, uh, the more caveman like, the more basic, the easier it was to put it across.
So, but are you a visual person?
Oh, very much so. I see I see the real and the what we consider the non-real. I see matter. I see particles, and which was one of the first things that I got into with special effects was programs that were particle driven. There's a lot of physics that goes into the creation of a software. Software is basically physics based. When you open up the let's say you start a project with any computer generator. Do you have a background in CG?
I don't, but I
Okay,
have a background in film
yeah.
editing, so.
So basically, what you're looking at your canvas in 2D, a canvas, like let's say if you're a painter, it's a 2D, two-dimensional canvas.
Right.
When you are in CG, they call it 3D, but it's beyond that because you basically you're the first pixel you draw, we actually it's a point, could be anywhere in the universe, space, time. It transcends. It's a quantum experience. You can basically draw from the quantum field and create from that, which is what most Marvel movies are based on. They're not based on our reality. They're based on a quantum reality.
So, when you moved to the States and you came from Cuba, how much was music a part of your life?
Oh, well, coming from a Latin culture, I mean, music is you have religion and you got music. those, are, those are the two main food groups that that we embrace and we're brought up on. So music, but then again, music. Growing up as a child, the music I heard, I was raised Cuban, but I was not aware of the world outside of Cuba.
Right.
I was aware of the cultures outside of Cuba because they were part of our culture. We had a lot of Chinese refugees that came from China to Cuba, running away from communism. They settled there. We had Jewish, Polish refugees that escaped Nazism and seek refuge in Cuba. So we have all those cultures now. And Italians, we had Spanish, which is my part of my background, French, which is part of my background. So it was multicultural, just like the United States is. You know, but the consciousness is we were all Cubans, or at least that was my perception. We're all Cubans. So it wasn't until I uh, I moved to the United States that was a new layer of identity because now I came from a place that we were all Cubans and now I'm a minority. Not everybody is Cuban, even though you could be Chinese but not Cuban. And to me, Chinese in Cuba was Cuban. you know,
Right.
or an Italian in Cuba was Cuban. Now Italian, now they have this Italian American and 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 Irish American. I'm going like, okay, I get it, but are we all like Americans? you know, so those are the things that as a child you have a lot of questioning, and of course things become clear as you mature, and your perception grows based on your experiences, and those are your main references. And then it comes a time like right now in my life, my perception is based on my experiences and other people's perceptions that I must accept. Their perception is more valid. It's just as valid as my own perception. Just because people don't feel or have the same experiences that I have, that doesn't mean that they're wrong. There's no, I respect your perception of things. Each individual occupies only one space right here. Nobody. This is me, and I'm looking. I can look at the world around me for my perception, my point of view, and there could be somebody standing 1 inches away from me, and we'll have a whole different perception of what I'm experiencing at the same time.
Agreed. Music. How did music come into your
Yeah,
life?
music. Well, and music again, it's it's a perception to me, and it became a vehicle of expression at a very early age, and I'll tell you why. Uh, Growing up in Cuba, music was part of celebration, celebrating life, celebrating happiness, the joy of my family, joy of being out. It could be the joy of listening to a big band playing salsa at the beach, and in the breeze, in the balmy island breeze. It's a whole different experience, and it stayed with me. I can feel it. What it felt to hear that the music, because the music sounds different outdoors than it does indoors. When it's breezy, and when it's like near the ocean, it's going to have a whole different resonance of a brass band, the trumpet, hearing it. It's very magical, because the environment and the sound, the frequency become one, and it has a whole different color to it. So then when my family moved from Cuba to Miami, I to the United States. We first went to Miami, and then later on we were relocated to New Jersey. I felt uprooted, very uprooted, and I was constantly challenged and growing up in survival mode. How am I going to survive all the changes that I'm going through without losing myself? I didn't want to lose myself. I came to the United States when I was almost 11 years old. I was already, you know, almost a teenager, you know, and it was very challenging culturally, uh, psychologically, being uprooted, having to go through all these changes. Meanwhile, I'm about to enter, teenage with hormonal rage, So there was, there was a certain disconnect culturally with me and all of that, right? Okay, things that, even though I came to the United States as a refugee, which means there's no plan B, there's not going back to Cuba, because as soon as we claim refugee status, we lost our Cuban citizenship. So I didn't even have a passport. I didn't even have a passport when I was touring with Ozzy Osbourne. So yeah, but that's a whole different story. So I'm stateless and with a green card eventually, and things like that. So it was very rough. So I found music, rock and roll, and this happened in 1964, which was which to my generation, it was the Big Bang culturally. The 60s for me was for my generation, my perception, that was the Big Bang, when everything created the universe that I live in now. You know, and The Beatles and Ed Sullivan. I mean, I talk to guys of my age, musicians, and that's the moment when we all decided this is what we're gonna do. My generation decided this is what we're gonna do. Some of us became professional musicians, but we all followed that consciousness. And it was really interesting growing up with the Beatles as kind of like teaching you how to join that consciousness, because it wasn't just about the music, it was about cultural and social change and awareness. And see, if the Beatles would have stayed just playing songs like She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, things like that, it would have never happened. It's just the fact that they grew and my generation grew along with them, that as teenagers it prepared us for things to come, especially when they went solo and George Harrison led with his spirituality and his music, that really brought that essence, that now you have massive global consciousness in tune to spirituality through music, through records like All Things Must Pass, George Harrison's first solo album. That to me was, I mean, to me that was the most important post Beatle work that they of all of them, and so music has not just taught me, but guided me. And what's really interesting about 64, 1964, is that most of us were entering that teenage phase of our journey. And it wasn't until 68, 67 that growth, like the today, 1967, June 1st, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper, the beginning of the summer of love. And we're still waiting for the summer of love to come back. This might be the year. I don't know. This could be. But it that pivot, all of a sudden you have this other consciousness that had been prepared through records like Rubber Soul and Revolver. Because it wasn't just the Beatles. The Beatles kind of like showed the way, but there was a lot of groups that embraced that, a lot of artists, that consciousness. Of course, Bob Dylan was a key figure in that consciousness. But I don't think Bob Dylan was driven by the same spirituality as, let's say, George Harrison was driven by that. Yeah, I thought Bob Dylan was more the cerebral side of music rather than Harrison was the spiritual side. And they both complement each other.
So tell me about that little kid who's kind of feeling lost and uprooted, who doesn't want to give up the sense of himself, and what music did for him.
Well, music became the vehicle to express my anger and frustration. I did not realize until recently, by doing some personal inventory about, that I am an angry musician, or have been an angry musician for a long time. That I gravitated to rock and roll rather than celebratory music such as dance music. The ritual of dancing is a celebration. Playing rock and roll, it's more comes out of rebellion, teenage angst.
When you played with your brother in New Jersey in the cover band,
Well, we
was
really
that a
didn't.
dance band?
Yeah, I mean, we were. My brother's 4 years younger than me, so when we left Jersey, he must have been 12, 13. We were not. We were. It was kind of like we still use music as an outlet to release our angst. I mean, we were not bad kids. We were not, like little hoods or anything like that. But there was a need to release something that we couldn't otherwise do except with music. We could grab a guitar and play it really hard or something and get that out. Uh, you know, but it wasn't until we moved back down to Miami that we started to play in cover bands. And by then, because I'm 4 years older than my brother actually started sneaking into 18 and over clubs at 16 to play. And as long as he behaved himself and did not drink or whatever, you know, he was okay. The club owners would let us bring him in. And we were not really drinking. We were just kids, trying to get into the club scene.
So that anger that you spoke of,
Mm.
is that does that kind of define the musical path you've taken? I mean, you've played with some amazing
Yeah,
bands, but
yeah.
mainly
Well,
on the heavier side.
yeah. I wouldn't really consider an anger, more like an angst, an
Okay.
edge, a rebellion. Which is typical of rock and roll. I mean, look at rock and roll being rooted in the blues is all about the angst. You know, angst from the traditional blues players. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of uh, it's based in pain and faith that things are gonna get better, and we're working towards that goal. No matter how long it takes us, things are gonna get better. Things are gonna be the way that they should be. You know, but along with that, you acknowledge the pain that has brought you to that moment of redemption. You know, and that's at the roots of rock and roll, real rock and roll. You know, it's in the harmonic structure of it. Even if you're not singing lyrically about it, you're feeling it because the harmonic structure, the frequencies that resonate with that emotion.
Can I ask, at what point in your life or which band were you with where that all came together, where the angst and your playing kind of meshed and became one?
Yeah, that's interesting. To me, the ultimate vehicle for my angst was playing with Ozzy Osbourne. It was it was edgy, hard, heavy, a lot of passion. See, Randy Rhodes, if you ever look, okay, when you see a musician making a face when you're
Yeah.
playing, you can call it passion, you can call it emotion. I mean, classical musicians, look at the angst they had, the magnitude of their music. It's passion. People call it passion. Yeah, you have passion for life. You know, uh, like I mentioned before, I spent my childhood in survival mode once we came to the United States because you're passionate. You're not giving up. You're trying to survive. You're trying to like find your way, not as much out, but in. Find my way in to where I'm at. To fit in. So I'm surviving it because at one point I'm going to be in this. I'm going to be part of this multicultural quilt, and I'm going to be seamless. I'm not going to be just one patch. I'm not going to be a patch. I'm going to be part of this woven, beautiful work, cultural work that we are. So, so it's passion. Yes, you can call it angst, you can call it rebellion, but that's all based on the same principle. You're passionate about it. I'm passionate about life. I'm passionate about music. I'm passionate of anything that I do because not to be passionate about it, you would not be acknowledging the blessing that you're receiving that moment. To be able to experience that emotion.
Can we talk about Randy Rhoads a little bit? Because I would imagine Randy played a big role in your career.
Absolutely.
And the fact that you've also written a book about Randy,
Mhm.
and the fact that you were in two bands with him. Tell me about how you think about Randy these days.
Yeah, interesting. That's a really really good question. They all are, by the way. You're doing an excellent conversation here. Interviews to me are just we're having the same conversation if we were hanging out at a Starbucks, you know, over coffee
Exactly.
talking. So it's the same thing. It's not really an interview, And as we speak, according to the quality of the conversation, I get to learn more about myself, you know, and I appreciate that. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
teaching me about myself. So about Randy, I play with two different Randy Rhodes. I play with Randy Rhodes, the local guitar hero in Los Angeles with Quiet Riot, and of course, I got to witness the full Randy Rhodes of that period in LA when I started to teach at Randy's mom's school, Musonia, because Randy was the teacher there too. So I saw him and I heard him, his broad musical palette, a lot of classical coloring in his palette that he did not get to use with Quiet Riot because Quiet Riot was more focused on being a pop glam rock band in the 70s. That's the premise of the band. And it wasn't until he joined Ozzy Osbourne later on that he asked Ozzy, "What do you want me to write?" And Ozzy said, "Oh, just be yourself." And that's when he was able to actually put all that classical knowledge, composition, performing technique into his playing, because now he was free to do that. It's like all of a sudden you're like you enter a whole different dimension or a reality. You go from 3D to 5D. You got all these different senses that you can tap into. And that's why I believe Randy's music has such quantum qualities. By quantum qualities, it's time and space, timeless music that a young fan is all of a sudden, becomes so listen to a song and it goes, "Oh, who's that?" They go, "Oh, that's Ozzy with Randy Rhodes." "Oh, Randy Rhodes. Wow. Let me let me check it out on YouTube. Watch all these, listen to the records and music and videos, and I go, wow." And then at some point, I find out that he's dead and how he died. And it has the same emotional impact, that loss, on them today as it did 39 years ago when we lost him in 1982. So it's a timeless effect on people. And I think it will go on 100 years from now. Somebody listening to Randy Rhoads playing for the first time, they will connect with that, with the resonance of his music and his playing, because it wasn't just his compositions; it was his delivery of his composition.
And what does that do to a player like you? Like, how does it inform you as a bass player who plays with
Oh,
him?
first of all, I mean, I've always been aware of this, but it grows more and more. Uh, grateful for the grateful for the blessing of having played with him, to have that as a reference. But it's a double-edged sword because once I lost him, I have not experienced it again. But then again, it gives me the passion to find it again, somehow, somewhere.
I mean, you've played with a lot of great people,
Yeah,
so you've never felt that you've met a guitarist of that caliber
I have.
since you lost.
No, it's not the calibers. It's that I've worked with. I play with a lot of musicians that have qualities of Randy, but not the complete checklist of what made up Randy Rhodes.
Right. So I can't even imagine what you had to go through when you lost Randy, and everything that came with that. But when you decide to leave Ozzy's band and go back to Quiet Riot, was that an easy decision or was that a difficult decision?
Yeah, interesting perception. My perception, and it still is, and it's always has been. I mean, you can go back to interviews that I've done decades ago, and I never quite saw the Mental Health Quiet Riot as the Randy Rhoads Quiet Riot because my perception of Randy is based on my experience with him in Ozzy. See, in Quiet Riot, I was there for about a year and a half, but we only did so many shows together. I got to actually get to know Randy better once I started teaching at Musonia, because to us, Quiet Riot was serious business. We would get together just about every night to rehearse, and we were not hanging out. We were rehearsing. We went in, we plug in, play the set list forwards and then backwards, and then if there was new songs to work on, we work on that, and then everybody would go home. I mean, by the time that Randy rehearsed with us at night, he had been teaching for anywhere from 6 to 8 hours already. So he just wanted to go home, rest, and then start all over again the next day. So it wasn't until I started working with teaching at Musonia that I actually got to be with Randy more outside of the Quiet Riot rehearsal or performances, right? And then with Ozzy, that was a whole different bonding. This is where I really got to know Randy. So that's my reference. There was the Quiet Riot version of Randy. There was Randy with Ozzy, and to me, the name Quiet Riot is the only real association to that period of Quiet Riot with Randy. Just it's we decided to use the same name. Basically, because reviews of Randy Rhodes while he was with Ozzy, most of them would always say, yeah, former LA band Quiet Riot guitarist Randy Rhodes. So even before I went back to playing with Kevin, and I can say we're back to playing with Frankie because I have been playing with Frankie since 1972, on and off in various bands, and Carlos. Uh, Even before that happened, Kevin asked Randy and me how we felt about Kevin possibly using the name Quiet Riot again in a possible recording deal that he was working on. So he just basically wanted to get our blessings, you know. But the band officially did not become Quiet Riot until we signed the record deal. I left Ozzy. I started playing with them. The missing link between the Randy Rhoads version of Quiet Riot and the Mental Health version of Quiet Riot is the band called Dubrow, which was Kevin's solo band that he started, and he wanted to name it Dubrow because in that time it was pretty much like today. A lot of musicians have multiple projects going on in order to be able to make a living, to sustain, to be able to pay the rent, to be able to put gas in your car, eat. They would do different projects around town, so you never really knew who was going to show up that evening to play.
Right.
So Kevin just said, "This, I'm going to be the singer. I'm the singer on this band. I'm not doing anything else. So I'm going to name it Dubrow." Once there was a record deal and a band in place, it made sense for us to be named Quiet Riot again. When we signed the record deal, it was half. I mean, it was Kevin and myself from the Randy Rhoads version, but in my eyes, like Randy drove Quiet Riot musically, Frankie Banali drove Quiet Riot musically. That version of the band,
Right.
that mental health version, it was very. He was as much of an influence on the music of Quiet Riot as John Bonham was in Led Zeppelin.
So I wonder, because playing music, you went through some tough times before the success, and I presume when you wind up with an Ozzy Osbourne, even though he's kind of redefining himself and starting a new career at that point, I mean, you're now playing at a level that's pretty high. I would assume that you're playing to thousands and thousands of people, which I'm not sure if you were doing before Ozzy Osbourne. So when you taste that experience of where Ozzy went to, and then decide that you want to go back to Quiet Riot or go to Quiet Riot, do you have an expectation of what Quiet Riot will be, or is it not about how many people you play in front of? It's just about the music.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was one single purpose of me rejoining Kevin DeBro, Frankie Banali, and joining Carlos Cavazo, who I had been playing with him before. It was just to find the joy of making music again, which I lost completely once Randy Rhodes passed away. Now, this happened almost 40 years ago. So I'm a different person. I got a different knowledge, different experiences, different perception of life. I did not know how to handle a situation like that of losing Randy, in such a tragic manner. And I was not aware of the responsibility that the musicians, the bandmates, have to celebrate the legacy of our bandmates that have moved on. Now I understand that. I did not back then. I might have I might have not left Ozzy if I had that knowledge, that perception 40 years ago. But then again, that was then. I can only, I there's so many ifs. There's so many things that can happen in life. If that I don't live in the if, I live in the now. And if I'm going to look back, that's what happened. Okay, and this is where I'm here now. So most likely in the future, I'll have a different. I'll act differently based on my perception today.
Right. But I mean, then Quiet Riot just exploded,
Hmm.
right? Like, I mean, that
Yeah.
album did really, really well, and it must have been amazing to be part of that, to contribute to another rise of a great band.
Yeah, and it's really interesting taking that ride because you're so it's such a narrow road. It gets narrower the higher you go, and you just keeping your eye on the road. You don't want to fall off. It's a very high cliff, right? So you want to fall off the trail. So you're so busy looking at every step that you make that you don't stop. You can't stop because if you stop, you get pushed over to the side.
Do you get to enjoy it?
No, you have that rare moment, very rare, and it might be a matter of seconds when you actually stop and you take a deep breath and you go, wow, look at the scenery from the top. Now all of a sudden you got to find a way how to stay up there, because there's all these other bands, artists pushing to get you off the cliff, right? So you're spending your time kind of like figuring out how am I going to stay up here and what now? Where do I go next? you know. So it's again it's something that I did not get to reflect on until years later. Take myself up to that place again, visit myself, or sometimes even just go inside of myself and look at it from my own perspective of myself. Almost 40 years ago, that we reached number one in 1983, so that's like 38 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, but the other thing about you is that you've reached that point a number of times,
Hmm.
and you've played with
Hmm.
like huge names. I mean, these
Yeah.
are the bands that I grew up with,
Yeah.
that I listen to still. But when you
Yeah.
think about your time with Ozzy, Quiet Riot, Whitesnake, Dio, I mean, it's an impressive list. What is it
Yeah.
about you and your playing that puts you in that place?
Oh.
Because I would presume that a lot of people might experience that once if they're really lucky. I don't know
Oh.
how many people get to experience it as much as you
Oh
have.
no! I mean, I've always given God my. Uh, I would say God is my agent, my manager. He books me all these great gigs. Yeah. It's. Did you read my book Off the Rails?
No, I haven't found it
Okay.
yet, but
Okay. Yeah. There's a chapter two, and I only mentioned this once because I figure somebody's gonna get it. They're gonna get it. But if I keep repeating it, it's gonna become kind of like preachy. So I'm just gonna say it once and then move on. And if you get it, you get it. If you didn't, it doesn't matter. You know.
but it's not really an autobiography. It's really
No.
about your time with Randy,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And, basically, I wrote the book with a singular purpose, and that is to answer the number one question I get asked when I travel around the world, which is, what was it like to play with Randy Rhodes? And what was it like? It's not a question of what was Randy Rhodes like. but what was it like to play with Randy Rhodes? So what I set out to do is to take the reader by the hand, standing right next to me as we're going back in time, visiting that time, space, and history. It's basically to me it's a quantum experience because I had Randy Rhodes alive in my head while I was writing the book, and the hardest chapter to write was the last one where he was still alive because chapter 19 coincided with the talking about explaining, not explaining, but reliving the crash, you know, and so it was very hard, but it needed to be done, and I did it, and I got closure from it unexpectedly, and so yeah,
But if we go back to the question, which is,
yes,
what is it about you
mm,
that puts you in
yes,
on stage with all these great bands?
yeah. Thank you for reeling me in because sometimes I just get lost. I go there,
That's
Sometimes I
fine.
go there as a visitor. Sometimes I go there as you know invasion of snatching my own body 40 years ago. I go inside. I go like, oh, I need to come back to reality. To now. Okay, I've been then before, and now is now. Okay, okay. So what is it? Okay, so before I joined Ozzy Osbourne, I was living in Kevin Dubrov's apartment. I was playing with him in the band Dubrow. I had another band called Angel, but we the band had lost the record deal, so I wasn't making any money from that. So I was playing with Dubrow. I'm paying for the rent by playing with him, and we were best friends, And so I was sleeping on the floor, and for a long, long time, I've been on a spiritual journey, trying to find what's already is there. but, but sometimes you have to turn on the light switch. Ah, there it is. You have to see the light in order to see what you're looking for. Uh, so I had an epiphany. I made peace with God that as long as my fingers were going to keep moving, I was going to keep playing. But my relationship with a higher power, my creator, was more important in my life than actually becoming a professional musician, which is because that's all I really aspire to. So I went into the unknown, meaning that I left it up to a higher power to actually create my future. I let go.
But there's got to be some qualities of you, whether it be your playing or your personality, that other bands say, we got to get Rudy. Let's call Rudy for this gig. Or else you wouldn't be working with the people you've worked. Is it just a matter of because you work with such high level bands, you have credibility instantly? Or
Yeah,
is it, what is the quality that you bring that people continually call you back to
yeah,
have them play with you?
yeah. That is a really good question. Trust, and by you, trust is like catch, 22. Where are you gonna? How are people gonna find out that you're trustworthy? Unless they experience you. But since you're not experiencing anything because you're not part of these big bands, so Randy Rhodes was the key figure to actually because Randy had established his trust factor with Ozzy and Sharon by working with them. You know, about let's say he joined the band in '79, so it's almost 2 years, 2 years, a year and a half working with them, recording Diary of a Madman, recording of course Blizzard of Oz before that, and spending time living with Ozzy. So they knew Randy. They say I can trust Randy.
Right.
He's got a good heart. He's very he's devoted to music, and he's completely trustworthy. So when it came time, they needed to find a bass player in a hurry in LA. If they were looking for a bass player in London, it would have been a different story, but they happened to be in Los Angeles. and they were looking for a bass player. And Randy kept telling Ozzy, uh, Rudy is the one you're looking for, because they were looking for certain qualities about the musician, trustworthy in the sense of not only being able to play the music, but also not being a bad influence on Ozzy. You know, not being not a bass player that was going to show up drunk or drugged out. We're living in the same bus, traveling in the same bus. We're spending a lot of time in the same bus. So there's somebody who's going to be a good person to hang out with in the bus, not be an idiot, things like that. Things that, it's given that the musician is going to be have have the chops, have the musical knowledge. That's a given. There's a lot of musicians that have that, but the trust factor, that's a whole different story. So Randy put his own trust, with Ozzy and Sharon by trusting me. Say Rudy is the one, So that's how I joined the band, and then this is something that I developed with them through time. I went through a period that they were testing me. Okay. Well, once I passed all of these little tests, I said, okay, yeah, he's trustworthy. You know, it was all done in a hurry, and they had so much that they on the line about Ozzy's career, because this is the very very beginning of Ozzy establishing his solo career. So there could be no missteps, no mistakes, and they, you do not need any member of the band that's going to be going against what you're doing. It's kind of like what I call the God's will factor. Being in a band, it's not that much different from anything else in the universe. There's an order of things in the universe, the way, the laws of the universe, or the laws of the band, or even the laws of any relationship, family relationship. There's laws. There's things that you follow to have a harmonious experience with your family, with a band. It's all based on relationships, and love is fundamental. Love what you do, love the people that you play with. Be grateful for everything. If you're coming from a place like that, you're going to be creating really good music. Fundamentally. Of course, you hear about stories about if there is certain uh, conflicts with songwriters, they create great music. Yeah, but it doesn't last for a long time. You know, the relationship at some point is going to implode. And whereas with a band, if you find that common denominator is love and admiration and respect for each other, that's going to outlast everything.
I wonder, okay, by the time that Whitesnake comes to you and
Yeah.
says, I want you in the band, I think initially you declined because you thought
Yeah.
that maybe the relationships between the band members weren't that great. But how much of that is partly the package of you and Tommy Aldridge?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We declined. Well, look, I had a really good look at the dynamics within Whitesnake when Whitesnake in 1984 supported Quiet Riot. So I'm a fan. I've been a fan of Whitesnake since the '70s. So I got to know them as people and love their music. Watch their show every night. But off the stage when we were hanging out, I became aware of some certain conflicts going on. Intergroup conflict going on. So and I had given notice to the band members in Quiet Riot that by the end of the 1984 tour I was going to leave the band. So somehow Coverdale finds about it, and on the very last night of our tour together, there was a little going away party for Whitesnake, and as we're saying goodbye, David gives me a hug, whispers in my ear, "We're gonna play together soon." Okay, so I thought, oh, they must have told him. So yeah, I leave the band. Tommy and I we start working on putting our band together, Tommy Aldridge, and we get a call from Whitesnake's management, and we go in and meet with them, and they, as they're making our offer, it was revealed that another member that was part of that conflict within the band was still in the band, and I felt, well, I just left a bad situation. I don't want to join another one, so I declined based on that purely. And then Tommy Aldrich subsequently declined also. And then a couple of years later, after Tommy and I were still together, we have put, we did a record with Tony McAlpine, but we never really found the singer we were looking for. And then we get the call to come in and do the Still of the Night video, and of course, David was the singer that we were looking for, because we for 2 years we couldn't really find a singer of that quality. So that became very clear, and also with having Vivian Campbell and Adrian Vandenberg in the band, it was like it felt like home, very comfortable. No conflicts in the band anymore. So it's, again, David knew about me. He trusted. He wanted me in the band based on what he, we had already established a relationship while we toured together. Not a bandmate relationship, but more like admiring. I always admired David's, talent, and as a songwriter and as a singer, of course, and all of that. So, it was great. It was great. So going back to being trustworthy, people get to know who you are, and that's why I get calls, because if I was an idiot, if I was really hard to work with on the road or in the studio, the word would get around, and I would not get phone calls. People asking, "Hey, are you available to do this or that?"
Okay, so when you've been with the Gassou for a while now, which seems a little different than the previous bands that you've been with, in a way that it's not as heavy, and certainly a great band, and certainly as far as us Canadians are concerned, great songs and whatever. So, tell me about that. Was that a difficult decision to join the Gassou?
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. As a matter of fact, I consider it a blessing, really, to play with the guests who great band, great guys, great beautiful legacy that is part of the soundtrack of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Very familiar with music. I mean, it's part of my DNA, who I am as a musician, and it's prior to playing with the Guess Who, I also played with another classic rock band, Blue Oyster Cult.
Right.
So it's music that I grew up with, and it's very lyrical, very melodic for it. The bass playing style of the '60s, late '60s and '70s was way more melodic than it became in the '80s. So I get to exercise my melodic muscle, bass playing muscle with that music, and I love it.
Does your approach to playing differ when it's creating new music versus recreating
Yeah,
classic music?
great question. Great question. Because that's one of the things that I always talk about in interviews. It's about, you create once. Let's say you're going in the studio. Let's say Slip of the Tongue, or yeah, Slip of the Tongue, Whitesnake. You I'm part of the creative process. With my bass line, my bass playing on the record. But no matter what, once I step out of that studio and the record's done, we're all recreating.
Right.
So I spend for let's say a few weeks. I mean, with pre-production, actually a few months in the creative process, pre-production, going into studio tracking, and so on. Okay, then you go on tour for about a year and a half. All you're doing is recreating. That's it. Every night you're recreating the same masterpiece, but then 2 weeks, an average of 2 weeks for any tour, any record that you're touring on, it takes about 2 weeks to actually understand the meaning of what you just created, once you play it in front of an audience and you get the adrenaline factor, and you get and then things start making sense because now there's body language added to it. While you're creating the music, rarely do you feel the resonance of what your creation is putting out until you actually hear it on stage live. Because recording can be a very clinical, laboratory like experience. You know, you go in and you do your bass parts with the guitar player. Let's say Steve Vai came in and he beautifully recreated this landscape that was not vision while we were doing pre-production for the record, because Steve Vai came in after Adrian Vandenberg injured his wrist and could not perform, record. And so Steve Vai came in and put his vision of what's already there. He interpreted what was already written. So that he did a beautiful job with that. And so now it's like now we're all on stage playing this song that we were all part of the creative process. But now things really come to life. This is a whole new creation because we're all on stage at the same time, resonating with our music, with our instruments. Yeah, it's a whole different experience. And then once you find that point of like, okay, we're taking the music to the level that we feel this is a great representation of what our music is all about. Because the first couple of weeks you're working things out, you're feeling it, you're feeling the stage, you're feeling the chemistry between the other guys in the band playing these songs. What does this really mean? 2 weeks later, you say, okay, wow, you have bloomed. You have bloomed. It's kind of like the seed coming out of the ground in darkness and laying the roots, hits the ground and the sunlight. That's when you start playing live. The sun hits you, and you really start growing and blooming, and then you are admired by everybody. You go, oh wow, what a beautiful flower that is.
Can you share with me a perfect moment on stage that you can think of? And when was it, and how does it feel?
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Let me see. I'm transporting. I'm transporting right now.
Make sure you come back.
Yeah. Well, that. You've been doing that great so far. You've been like reeling me in. Okay. Okay. I'm going, and I'm picking bands. Let's just pick one that just happened 38 years ago, a couple of days ago. The US Festival. The US Festival. We were like a last second addition to.
This would have been Whitesnake, correct?
No, that was with Quiet Riot.
Oh, okay.
With Quiet Riot. We have been touring with the Scorpions, who were warming up to co-headline the US Festival with Van Halen in 1983. So we were opening up for them, and on the very last show that we did with them in Denver, the local promoter, Barry Fay from Fayline, he was the local promoter of that show was also the person in charge of putting the bands together, kind of like promoter, but it was such a big event that there were like a lot of people, working it. So he sees us and he says, hey, would you guys be interested in playing the US Festival? We just moved Joe Walsh from the metal day to the rock day, day where Bowie was the headliner and Stevie Nicks and so on. And we said, yeah. And so overnight, we had like maybe 48 hours or less to prepare for the show. Prepare meaning logistically. We knew we couldn't drive our equipment, so we just rented stuff. We called SIR, and everything was There were not a whole lot of things available because they already have been rented by the other bands. Because it was a huge festival. So a lot of bands coming in from England. So they had to rent equipment, And so, we made make do. And I think what really helped us to give a relaxed performance was the fact that we didn't have weeks to think about the show.
Right.
Like, oh my God, we're playing this huge event called the Oz Festival. No, it was done like that. Okay, you got so many hours to do that, and you're going to be doing the show. So you just kind of like you go into like survival mode. Survival is like, okay, I'm going to survive this gig because it's not. We didn't have a crew. Our crew travel in a truck and move our equipment to the next show. So we had like our manager and tour manager being our roadies, and they were not qualified. They made a lot of mistakes. That of course you cannot let the audience know.
So, and how many would have been in your crew at that point?
Two more people, actually two,
Okay.
one at each side. Yeah, and backline crew, and so it was kind of like we're gonna get this done no matter what challenges we meet, and then we'll go on to the next gig because we were like this. We were like sperm. We went on sperm mode. Like the sperm. It's like millions of other sperms, and you're like the one determined to get in there. Yeah.
Are you thinking, like, is it a competitive thing at this point? Like, are you thinking about the other bands that are on stage?
Competitive. It was more about survival.
Okay.
Competitive. Oh boy. Interesting. Yeah. I used to go on stage. I say I used to because I think I have a better strategy of how I want to be as a human being. I say strategy because sometimes you have to really think about it. Make choices. You have to make choices. How to conduct yourself. Choices of what to follow and what not to follow. As your behavioral patterns as a human being. And competition breeds champions. It really does. That's why you got Michael Jordans and LeBron James and whatever, in sports. And because these are people who become the ultimate warriors under certain circumstances. This is not just about surviving, it's about exceeding or your personal best. That's what competition does. You're not really competing with that guy. That's that guy.
Right.
You're competing with yourself.
Right.
What's the best you that you can be? And that's what I've been subconsciously doing all this time. I really haven't been competing with anybody else. But I love being the least qualified guy in the band because I love to learn from the best. Like, let's say, when I played with Ozzy, that was best example. I'm the least qualified guy to be up on that stage. I got no resume. I haven't done anything. But boy, going on that stage with Randy Rhodes, Tommy Aldridge, Ozzy Osbourne, Don Airy, that was fantastic.
Okay, so I'm going to reel you back into the US Festival.
Yeah.
And that perfect moment, because
Yeah.
that's what you can tell me.
Yeah.
But tell me, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, in the history of rock music or heavy rock, that was a significant day because I think punk movement had been pretty much taken over.
Yeah.
And I think that's when Van Halen headlined that show, some people consider it the day that heavy metal came back.
Yeah.
Do you remember it that way?
Yeah, that's a really good perception, but from my perception of being not only on stage but also being part of it happened in Los Angeles, California. Punk did not have in LA the same impact that it had in New York City or New Wave as far as the locally. Because LA is too sunny, especially that generation. A lot of kids going to the beach, a lot of surfing going on. And yeah, LA is more like what Van Halen sang about,
Right.
you know, or the Beach Boys. Of course, it has this dark side, like let's say the Doors
Yeah.
or Guns N' Roses or bands like Fear, that have come out of the underground movement. But that's not really typical of the LA sunny experience. You know that song "I Love LA,"
Mm-hmm.
Randy Newman. It's pretty
Yeah.
much like that, or used to be like that, especially in 1980, 82, 83.
Okay, so take me back to the US Festival and
Yeah,
you being on stage and why you went there when I asked you about the perfect moment.
yeah. Why? Because it was outdoors. It was the sun. It felt like it's kind of like going to the beach, but you got your guitar on. It was perfect. It was a perfect day. It was beautiful weather, no rain. It was glorious.
And musically?
Musically, Quiet Riot was the type of band that you could put us in a club or you could put us at the Oz Festival. We'll give you the same performance. That's what we did. That's how we roll.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like we were better or worse that day. I mean, sometimes when you have certain technical challenges, you're going a little bit into survival mode, but that should not get into your recreating or creating in the moment. Creating an option of what else you can do to fix the problem.
Two more questions.
Yeah.
One is, for somebody who's played with Ozzy, played with Whitesnake, Dio, all the greats, what do you listen to at home?
Oh, what do I listen to at home? Oh.
Like, are we basically listening to that type of music all the time? Or
No.
do you listen to something that would surprise me completely?
No. I was telling somebody yesterday that when I first started going on tour with Ozzy, it was like 1981. And it was also, it coincided with the introduction of the Walkman.
Mm-hmm.
The first Sony Walkmans coming out. And so it meant that you could walk around the streets and we're, finding a place to go have lunch. And I was one of those guys with my Walkman on, right?
Right.
And I always liked to listen to like bass players that inspired me. And Gino Vanelli always had some great bass players on his record.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, Nightwalker was out. And I believe it was the bass player, I forgot his name. He's got such a beautiful name that But anyways, records like that I listened to. I was doing a podcast with John Taylor from Duran Duran, his bass tech, and I was talking about him. Yeah, I used to listen to Duran Duran on that first record. Girls on Film and stuff like that. So I don't know. I listen to bass players. In musical content.
Right.
Great songs with great bass players. So it could be anybody.
My final question to you. Mm-hmm. Tell me about when you look back on this amazing journey that you've had. What comes to your mind about your musical journey?
Oh, gratitude. I mean, I'm so grateful. My musical journey. I mean, if I would have written a letter to God and say, please make it happen like this, it would have never have been as magnificent as what God has created for me.
Well put.
Because I'm not that smart.
Rudy, I've been a fan for a long time. I listened to the records you've been on. I've listened to the bands you've played with for many, many years. It's a thrill for me to sit and talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Marco. It's been a pleasure. Great questions, and thank you for reeling me in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
God bless.